What happens when the world's most heavily guarded region, a place completely defined by this seemingly impenetrable geopolitical shield, just suddenly finds that very shield cracking right down the middle?
I mean, it creates an immediate global shockwave. A fracture in that specific part of the world sends tremors through, well, the entire foundation of global diplomacy and trade.
And international security as a whole, right?
Exactly. The whole architecture just shakes.
Yeah. And today we have a fascinating and frankly pretty alarming intelligence brief from KULT that tracks exactly that scenario. It details how Gulf states are just frantically scrambling for new defense alternatives.
Right, because we are currently 2 weeks into what the intelligence characterizes as Operation Epic Fury.
Which kicked off on February 28. It's a U.S.-Israeli military campaign against Iran. So our mission for this deep dive today is to pull this brief apart, understand the rapid fallout, and figure out what it actually means for you when the old rules of international security just evaporate overnight.
And before we get into the actual mechanics of this fallout, we really should set a clear baseline for you, the listener. We are looking at real-time, highly charged intelligence here.
Super sensitive stuff.
Extremely. It involves the U.S., the Trump administration, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and the Iranian government. So, to be explicitly clear, our role today isn't to play politician. We aren't picking sides, right-wing or left-wing, and we certainly aren't endorsing any specific viewpoints.
Yeah, no personal opinions from us.
Right. We are here strictly to act as an analytical lens. We're just unpacking the claims and the reporting exactly as they're presented in this specific KULT text, so you can understand the mechanics of what is unfolding.
Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine you're renting a room in a massive, very expensive house, and your two roommates suddenly start throwing heavy furniture at each other.
That's a great way to picture it.
Right. And you didn't start the fight. In fact, you spent months trying to stop it. You even got formal promises that they wouldn't involve you. But somehow, your brand new television is the very first thing that gets smashed into pieces.
Yeah, and that perfectly captures the profound frustration in the Gulf capitals right now. I mean, they feel like the tenant whose meticulously curated living room has just become a free fire zone.
Totally. And the catalyst for that anger is just the sheer suddenness of it all. That's the most jarring detail in the initial readout for me.
The lack of warning.
Yes. Officials from the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, they claim they received absolutely zero advance notice before Operation Epic Fury was launched.
Which is staggering. I mean, when you evaluate the depth of the strategic and logistical partnership between the U.S. and the Gulf states, it's massive.
They host deeply integrated American military installations.
Exactly. So to receive no warning about a major military campaign being launched from or even adjacent to their immediate backyard, that is a profound breach of standard diplomatic protocol.
Especially considering they had been repeatedly, vocally warning Washington that striking Iran would have catastrophic consequences.
Uncontrollable consequences for the entire region, and those warnings seem to have been entirely validated.
Yeah, the scope of the devastation outlined here is just massive. It's crossing borders rapidly. We aren't just talking about isolated military skirmishes.
No, not at all.
Since this operation began, Iranian missiles and drones have struck Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Oman.
It's a sweeping, completely indiscriminate radius of retaliation. It just ignores traditional boundaries.
And look at the specific targets taking hits. It's not just U.S. military bases absorbing the blow. The data shows strikes on oil refineries, airports, luxury hotels.
Residential areas?
Yeah, civilian infrastructure is taking direct hits. Which brings us to a specific data point that genuinely made me pause. A Gulf official told the Associated Press that their interceptor stockpiles are, quote, running out rapidly.
Yeah, that's a terrifying reality for them.
But I have to push back on the logistics here. We're talking about Saudi Arabia and the UAE. These are some of the wealthiest, most heavily fortified nations on Earth.
They spend tens of billions on defense.
Right. So how is it mechanically possible for them to run out of interceptors in just 14 days?
What's fascinating here is the brutal, unforgiving mathematics of modern asymmetric warfare. It's basically an economic and manufacturing mismatch.
How so?
Well, when we talk about interceptors like a Patriot missile, we're talking about highly sophisticated, extremely expensive pieces of technology.
Like millions of dollars per unit, right?
Exactly. Millions. They require complex supply chains, specialized microchips, and months of precise manufacturing.
So it's not a failure of technology, it's a failure of economics.
Right.
We've built golden shields to stop wooden arrows.
That is exactly the dynamic. Compare a multi-million-dollar interceptor to what it's actually trying to shoot down. We're
Right.
looking at adversary drones that can be manufactured for like maybe $20,000.
Wow, 20,000 versus millions.
Yeah, using off-the-shelf commercial parts, they can be built in garages and deployed in massive, overwhelming swarms.
And you have to shoot them all down.
Right, and the interception logic mandates that you often fire 2 expensive missiles at 1 cheap drone just to guarantee a kill and prevent radar saturation.
Oh, wow. So you're spending even more.
So even if your interception rate is flawless, if the incoming volume is high enough, you simply run out of the expensive bullets before the adversary runs out of the cheap targets.
So 2 weeks of sustained drone barrages will deplete anyone's stockpile.
Anyone's. No matter the size of their sovereign wealth fund.
And compounding that mathematical nightmare is a bitter complaint echoing out of the Gulf. The brief says the U.S. operation is reportedly laser-focused on defending Israel and U.S. troops.
Leaving the Gulf to fend for itself.
Exactly. They feel they've been left to absorb the collateral damage entirely on their own.
Which breeds a very specific, deeply corrosive kind of resentment. It's the reality of absorbing the physical blowback of a policy you actively opposed.
Without receiving the protective umbrella you thought you bought.
Right. And that sentiment is perfectly encapsulated by Prince Turki al-Faisal, the former head of Saudi intelligence.
What did he say?
In an interview with CNN, he bluntly labeled this Netanyahu's war. He argued that the Israeli prime minister somehow convinced the U.S. president to back his perspective, effectively pulling the entire region into a destructive conflict.
A conflict the Gulf had desperately maneuvered to avoid.
Exactly.
But, the physical destruction of refineries and the depletion of missiles, that's only half the crisis here. The real panic in places like Riyadh and Abu Dhabi stems from a completely shattered diplomatic illusion.
The broken promises.
Yeah. The reason these physical hits hurt so deeply is because the Gulf states truly believed they had engineered a diplomatic firewall to prevent this exact scenario.
They were playing a highly calculated game of strategic ambiguity, and they thought they had won it.
Right. The GCC governments, specifically Saudi Arabia and the UAE, weren't just quietly hoping to stay out of the crossfire. Back in January, they made highly public statements.
Very explicit assurances.
Yeah, assurances to Tehran that their airspace and their sovereign territory would absolutely not be used to launch attacks against Iran.
And this wasn't just a sudden panic concession. According to reporting from Al Jazeera and Foreign Policy cited in the intelligence, these commitments were the culmination of years of careful back-channel diplomatic dialogue.
So they put in the work.
They really did. They put in the hard geopolitical work to establish this posture of neutrality, trying to decouple their economic fate from Washington's military posture.
But here's the bitter reality of that strategy. Despite all those years of dialogue, despite the explicit non-aggression guarantees, when epic fury broke out, the Gulf states somehow became Iran's primary targets anyway.
Yeah, the irony is incredibly dark.
It's like getting a signed, notarized contract from a hurricane saying it will bypass your house and then it parks right over your roof anyway.
That analogy hits the core of the issue perfectly. We have to look at the underlying mechanics of why that diplomatic firewall melted instantly.
Why would Tehran target them despite those explicit January assurances?
It highlights the impossible, contradictory position the Gulf states chose to navigate. You just cannot effectively claim total neutrality in a regional war when you are actively hosting the critical military infrastructure of one of the primary combatants.
Right, because no matter what your diplomats say, the airstrips and the radar dishes are physically bolted to your soil.
Exactly. From Tehran's strategic perspective, if American forces, logistics, and command centers are stationed in your country and an American campaign is launched.
Even if the planes didn't take off from your specific runway that morning.
Right. You are functionally integrated into the adversary's war machine. The Gulf states tried to cleanly separate their sovereign diplomatic posture from the reality of the foreign military hardware sitting within their borders.
And Iran's rapid retaliation proves that distinction completely evaporates when the shooting starts. So the physical defenses are failing because the asymmetric math is against them. The diplomatic defenses have collapsed because hosting bases negates neutrality.
Look what's left.
Well, when both the missiles and the treaties fail, the battlefield naturally shifts to the only arena the Gulf still controls: economics.
And this is where the leverage actually sits for the GCC. If they can't control the airspace, they will utilize the boardroom.
Because they can't shoot down the swarms, they are looking at financial retaliation against Washington. And the anger driving this pivot is palpable.
Oh, yeah.
The readout quotes a former senior U.S. official in the region talking to CNN, and this official says the Gulf sees Washington as, quote, reveling in the violence.
Wow.
They see no clear exit plan from the U.S., all while the economies of the GCC are just bleeding out.
Reveling in the violence is incredibly stark language, especially coming from a former U.S. official describing the internal viewpoint of America's own allies.
It sounds like a total breakdown in trust.
Irreparable, maybe? The Gulf feels that Washington is pursuing ideological or narrow strategic goals without any regard for the massive collateral economic damage being inflicted on its partners.
And so we see the countermoves taking shape. According to writers, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE have already begun reviewing their sovereign investments to offset the economic impact.
Makes sense.
But here's where it gets really interesting. It's not just moving sovereign wealth around. The Financial Times reported that some Gulf countries are actually examining whether they can invoke force majeure clauses in their existing defense contracts with Washington.
That is a massive escalation.
Right. Now, force majeure, that's the standard act of God clause. How do you invoke that against the very entity fighting the war? What does that actually look like in practice?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, invoking force majeure in this context is the legal equivalent of detonating a bomb inside a boardroom.
A legal bomb.
Right. Force majeure is a standard clause in most major international contracts that frees both parties from liability when an extraordinary event beyond their control occurs.
Like extreme weather or a pandemic.
Or, crucially, the outbreak of war.
But they want to invoke it to punish their own defense supplier.
Precisely. In the context of international arms sales and defense contracts, we are talking about intricate agreements worth tens, sometimes hundreds of billions of dollars.
Spanning decades.
Yeah. If a Gulf state officially invokes force majeure, they're essentially arguing legally that the geopolitical environment has been so fundamentally destroyed by the unilateral actions of the United States that the contract is no longer valid.
They're just ripping up the receipts.
They're saying, we no longer owe you these billions, and we are legally severing this massive financial pipeline because your reckless actions caused the act of God that ruined the neighborhood.
Threatening to legally sever financial ties over a conflict? I mean, that isn't just a polite diplomatic disagreement. That is weaponizing international contract law to punish a superpower.
It is a profound shift in how they apply leverage. If they cannot rely on the U.S. military umbrella to provide physical security, they will use their massive sovereign wealth and legal contracts as a mechanism of defense.
And retaliation.
Yes. It sends a chillingly clear message. If you won't protect our physical infrastructure, we will actively dismantle our shared financial infrastructure.
Which accelerates a historic pivot. The realization that the U.S. might be an unreliable or even a dangerous protector, combined with this massive economic strain, it's forcing the Gulf states to aggressively diversify their defense portfolios.
They're looking way beyond Washington.
Necessity is forcing their hand faster than they ever planned.
When the primary load-bearing pillar of your entire national security strategy proves unstable in a crisis, you have to pour new concrete.
You need new pillars immediately.
Exactly.
And new global players are eagerly stepping in to pour that concrete. The brief details how France has mounted an immediate, highly visible response.
Very visible.
Paris has already deployed advanced Rafale fighter jets to protect French bases and secure the airspace over the UAE. And the French Foreign Minister, Jean-Noël Barrot, explicitly stated that Paris is ready to step up and help defend the Gulf states if they are asked.
France has always maintained a strategic, independent interest in the region.
Yeah.
But stepping up this visibly with top-tier air assets in a moment where the U.S. is perceived to be failing its allies, that is a major geopolitical power play.
They're flexing.
Totally. The Rafale is a highly capable system, and France is signaling that they can provide the kind of immediate, unconditional air cover that Washington currently isn't.
And it isn't just European powers maneuvering here. Analysts note that the Gulf states are looking sharply east, rapidly deepening defense ties with South Korea.
That's a huge development.
The data highlights expanded, expedited arms sales to Saudi Arabia through joint ventures, specifically mentioning a partnership with Hanwha Defense.
South Korea is a fascinating, highly strategic alternative for them. Because South Korea technically remains on a war footing with the North, they maintain a massive, highly active, an incredibly efficient industrial defense base.
So they can churn this stuff out quickly.
They can manufacture and deliver complex hardware rapidly. And crucially, a partnership with a company like Hanwha often comes without the heavy political strings or the shifting domestic policy debates that inevitably accompany U.S. arms sales.
No congressional bottlenecks.
Right.
But the intelligence makes a very careful distinction about this pivot. We have a quote from Sanam Vakil of Chatham House, who told Politico that the Gulf states, quote, are thinking about what would happen if the United States walked away.
But they aren't completely replacing them.
Exactly. The Carnegie Endowment points out that they are recalibrating. They want to reduce their exposure to shifting U.S. priorities without throwing the whole historical partnership away.
It's a balance.
So, what does this all mean? It's like moving from a monolithic mainframe computer where one glitch crashes your whole company to a modular system. You keep the main server, but you plug in French and South Korean backups so you never go offline completely.
I mean, they aren't canceling their premium subscription to U.S. defense just yet, but they are definitely opening up accounts with the French and South Korean streaming services just in case.
Right.
That is the exact architectural shift we are witnessing. Structurally, no single nation can entirely replace the sheer scale, the intelligence apparatus, and the logistical backbone of the U.S. military overnight.
You can't just unplug 70 years of American infrastructure.
No, you can't. But what you can do is aggressively dilute the dependency. You recalibrate. By bringing in French air power, by partnering with South Korean defense contractors, you create that modular security environment.
So if Washington suddenly pivots its priorities, your whole grid doesn't crash.
Exactly. But even with these new modular partnerships forming, the closing assessment of the KULT brief paints a pretty grim immediate picture.
Yeah, it does.
It states that, for now, Gulf capitals remain completely paralyzed. They are caught perfectly between boiling anger toward Washington and genuine fear of Tehran.
With no clear path to security in the face of either.
Because the French jets and the South Korean manufacturing joint ventures, those are brilliant strategic solutions for tomorrow. But the Iranian drones and missiles are falling on oil refineries today.
The frustration isn't theoretical, it's happening right now.
Building a multipolar defense architecture takes years of integration. But as we've seen from the depleted Patriot stockpiles, these nations are dealing with a crisis measured in days and hours.
It has been an incredibly chaotic 2-week journey for the Gulf states, at least according to the intelligence we've unpacked today. We've seen them move from the shock of an unexpected war and zero advance warning to watching the brutal asymmetric math drain their advanced interceptor stockpiles dry.
Yeah, and we've seen the painful realization that years of sophisticated diplomatic back channels couldn't protect them from the reality of hosting foreign military bases.
And we watched how swiftly that physical vulnerability transitioned into asymmetric economic warfare.
With Gulf states threatening to invoke force majeure to weaponize contract law.
All of which is accelerating this frantic, historic search for new global allies, bringing France and South Korea into the fold to fundamentally recalibrate their entire defense strategy.
It really illustrates how quickly global structures we think of as permanent can just pivot in real time.
It's a stark reminder for all of us that in modern geopolitics, flexibility is just as important as firepower.
Absolutely. The illusion of a static, predictable world order shatters very quickly under the immense pressure of actual conflict.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with something to think about. Think back to our roommates fighting, the smashed television, and the scramble to build a new security system. If the Gulf states successfully decentralize their security, if they actually build this modular, patchwork defense grid integrating France, South Korea, and whoever else steps up, how will a multipolar defense grid change the way future conflicts in the Middle East are fought or deterred?
That's the big question.
If striking one Gulf country means an adversary is suddenly entangling the sovereign defense contracts and military assets of 3 different continents at once, does that make the world more stable through complex deterrence? Or does it just guarantee that the next time the roommates fight, the entire neighborhood catches fire? Something to mull over. Until next time.